Beijing has confirmed Donald Trump's state visit to China, the first by a sitting US president in almost a decade. The three-day trip starts from Wednesday, and both sides are framing the summit as an important moment for ties between the two largest economies. Beijing says it is ready to work with Washington for more stability globally, while the White House described the upcoming meeting as highly symbolic. The visit was planned for earlier this year, but Mr. Trump postponed it to focus on the Iran conflict. That war, along with disagreements over tariffs and Taiwan, are some of the thorny issues expected to be discussed. Now, ahead of the summit, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent will head to Seoul for talks with Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng. Mr. Bessent will be in Tokyo a day earlier to meet Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi and other officials. Mr. Trump's return to Beijing will include a welcome ceremony, a tour of the Temple of Heaven, and a lavish banquet. The leaders are expected to hold talks over 2 days, with another working lunch and tea meeting scheduled on Friday. CNA's Tan Su-hui has more on expectations surrounding the summit.
It was a lavish welcome for U.S. President Donald Trump when he first set foot in China nearly a decade ago. Chinese President Xi Jinping hosted Mr. Trump to a private tour of the Forbidden City. It was winter, but the mood was warm. Mr. Trump hailed his great chemistry with Mr. Xi and called the Chinese leader a very special man. Lawyer and chairman of China's American Chamber of Commerce, James Zimmerman, has lived and worked in China for the last 28 years.
I think there was, as always, a sense of optimism.
But that optimism soon vanished. Upon returning home, Mr. Trump wasted no time to wage a trade war against China, punishing the country for what he called unfair trade practices. China retaliated, leading to a full economic showdown in the years that followed.
After his visit in 2017, but we had an environment where there was more talk of decoupling and more talk of, competition between, the U.S. and China. And then when Trump took office last year, there was more talk about using tariffs.
We have tremendous national security because of tariffs.
Within the first 100 days of his return to the White House, Mr. Trump picked up where he left off and upped the ante on Beijing and the rest of the world. It marked one of the most aggressive phases of economic confrontation between the two powers. While trade is expected to dominate discussions when Mr. Trump returns to Beijing, analysts believe President Xi will balance pragmatism with a defensive posture, especially as Mr. Trump's war on Iran triggers a global energy crisis.
I don't think that there's much China can do on the war itself, but on the home's bottleneck, I think it is still there, and also China is anxious to see the solution of this bottleneck. So I do think that both leaders will try their best to work out a plan to solve the problem.
I'm here at the Temple of Heaven, where Mr. Trump is expected to tour on the second day of his visit here in Beijing. Both sides have just announced that Mr. Trump will visit China from the 13th to 15th of May. The confirmation from Beijing came only days before the scheduled trip, consistent with its tightly controlled approach to diplomacy. Some locals I spoke with say they're hopeful of what his visit brings.
要有改变是最好的，能够促进两国的发展。
他来访问肯定有好的。
But not everyone is excited.
我讨厌他。中国人民都是喜欢和平的，但是他说话就是不转说。对话总比争斗好吧？也希望他访华，挽回一下我们大国与大国之间的关系。 但是对他我们不抱太多的希望。
Mr. Zimmerman of AmCham, meanwhile, hopes the Beijing reunion acts as a catalyst for a reset in U.S.-China relations.
This 2026 is an opportunity for both leaders to actually be visionary, in a sense that they'll change the path that the relationship has been taking for the last 10 years and move it in a direction where we will see more engagement, more dialogue, more of a discussion that manages the competition and challenges between the two sides.
One key indicator will be whether Mr. Xi reciprocates with a visit to Washington later this year. Tan Si-hui, CNA, Beijing.
And for more, Nick Harper is covering this story for CNA live from Washington, D.C. Now, Nick, as we've heard, it's been nearly a decade since Trump's last visit. What is the U.S. realistically hoping to achieve from this summit?
That's right, Angela, a very long time, and therefore I think the United States is perhaps looking for small wins out of this summit. Of course, China is perhaps the US's biggest strategic competitor and rival, but it also looks for areas where the US is able to cooperate and collaborate with Beijing. In many ways, we could see a possible reset in relations if we think back during the last year or so. Since Donald Trump's return to the White House, there have been very rocky relations with China. Much of that prompted by those very dramatic tariffs about a year ago. We saw tariffs between the US and China increase to over 100%, essentially killing trade. And then there was that pause while the trade policy was discussed between both sides. That still hasn't yet been finalised. Now, that probably won't happen during the course of this trip either, but trade will be central. And the United States wants China to buy more agricultural products. For example, about 25 million metric tons of soybeans a year for the next 3 years. We'll also see discussions around artificial intelligence. Of course, incredible competition between the US and China when it comes to AI, and in many ways China pulling ahead of the US, which is why the US has placed export curbs on some of its most advanced semiconductors, and China wants those eased. In return, the United States wants China to try and loosen some of the restrictions that are on rare earth exports coming out of China to the United States. There are also tenser issues on the laundry list of issues they'll be discussing, things like nuclear weapons and Taiwan. But really, I think modest expectations at best. We could see some outcomes boosting mutual trade and investment, in particular when it comes to China buying more US energy, those agricultural products, and a suggestion that China may be willing to buy more Boeing airplanes as well.
Now, Iran, of course, is expected to be a major topic of discussions. What exactly will Washington want from Beijing on this issue?
Well, that's right. When it comes to Iran, remember, Donald Trump's trip to Beijing was delayed because of the Iran conflict. Donald Trump was hoping to get that wrapped up before heading to Beijing. Of course, the Iran conflict is still rumbling on. But China does have very close ties with Iran. We've just seen the Iranian Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi, meeting with China's top diplomat, Wang Yi, in the course of the last week. And because Beijing is a major buyer of Iranian oil, there is a possibility, from the US perspective, to perhaps get some diplomatic help from Beijing. Of course, for the Chinese, they could urge the Iranians to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. That would help the oil flow a little bit easier around the world. But of course, really, it's all about ending that US naval blockade if the Iranian oil is actually going to leave the ports and head to China. Ultimately, Donald Trump wants to try and push Xi Jinping to use his influence to get Iran to make a deal. Lots to discuss there, but of course, there is that strategic importance when it comes to Iran. And in many ways, Iran may be the issue that overshadows the whole of the summit.
Yeah, Nick, well, turning to the Middle East now. On the Iran ceasefire, Mr. Trump has called Iran's response to Washington's peace plan, I quote, unacceptable. So where do negotiations currently stand with both sides?
Well, stalled, really. That proposal and then counter-proposal, the aim is to try and find consensus, but it's just not working. If they're able to agree to some sort of proposal, it would then start a 30-day period when they would discuss more, build on the framework, try and achieve lasting peace. In terms of the US proposal, number of issues there, including a pause on Iran enriching uranium, possibly for between 12 to 15 years, also committing to never obtain a nuclear weapon, commit commit to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and in return, the US would give Iran sanctions relief and unfreeze billions of frozen Iranian assets. But over the course of the last day, Iran sent a counter-proposal and added on some extra items that, as you mentioned, Donald Trump wasn't happy with. Iran added requests including compensation for war damage, and again emphasising that they feel that they have sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. They say that they want the US to end the naval blockade. That has been something they've been asking for several weeks, and again committing to get the US to release those assets frozen in US banks. Now, Iran says that its proposal is both generous and responsible, but with Donald Trump saying it's completely unacceptable, that diplomatic push for peace remains in limbo. Really very little chance of a breakthrough, and perhaps more worryingly, with it in limbo, there is of course always that possibility that hostilities may restart.
Nick, thank you so much for that update. That was Nick Harper covering this story for CNA from Washington, D.C.